December 14th, 1950. 31 miners entered the Brackenridge Coal Mine. None of them ever came back. At first, it was just another day underground. Picks striking, sweat dripping, voices echoing through the dark. The ground shook, the beams gave way, and chaos swallowed them whole. They weren't gone instantly. They fought to survive. When the dust settled, not all were gone. A few still breathed, trapped in the dark, with no way out. The company called it an accident. Families were paid and sworn to silence.
But 55 years later, their voices were heard again.
Help us! Can anyone hear us?
What really happened to those poor miners? Was it truly an accident or a massacre?
Let's uncover it together here on Vanished Stories. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't yet. Grab your coffee with milk, relax, and listen carefully, because the truth is about to begin.
The winter wind whipped through Hazelton, a biting echo of the chill that had settled deep into its history. It was December 14th, 1950, when 31 souls descended into the Brackenridge Coal Mine for the night shift, never to see the light again. The official story, whispered like a dark secret, spoke of a swift, catastrophic cave-in at 11:47 p.m., claiming every life instantly. The mining company, with a chilling generosity, offered settlements twice the usual rate, contingent on one immutable decree: silence. The mine was then swallowed by industrial concrete, and Hazelton, a town built on coal, buried its grief beneath a veneer of forgetfulness. But some secrets refused to stay buried. 55 years later, the rusted jaws of a demolition crew tore into the old Brackenridge mining offices. As a sledgehammer connected with a sealed basement wall, Jake Mitchell felt a tremor that was all wrong, not the solid thud of impact against stone, but the hollow, drum-like resonance of empty space. "Hold up," he called to Tommy Garner, who was poised for another swing. "Something's off." They were 3 days into dismantling a building that had stood vacant since '87, its windows boarded, its copper veins stripped by scavengers. Yet the bones of the place were robust, a testament to old-world craftsmanship, with beams thick as ancient trees and foundations that plunged deep. Tommy lowered his hammer, a question in his eyes. Jake knelt, pressing his palm flat against the warped floorboards, feeling that unsettling void beneath. "Get me the pry bar." The first board lifted with unnatural ease, the nails rusted to dust. Beneath, where solid subflooring should have been, was nothing but a gaping maw of darkness. Jake shone his flashlight into the abyss. "Jesus Christ!" Tommy peered over his shoulder. "What is it?" "Another room," Jake breathed. "Not a crawlspace, not a utility shaft." In the flashlight's beam, the ghostly outlines of furniture emerged. A desk, filing cabinet, an entire hidden basement level absent from every blueprint they possessed. It took them 40 minutes to carve out an entry point. Jake descended first, the improvised wooden ladder groaning under his weight. The air that greeted him was not the expected stench of mold and decay, but the musty perfume of old paper, leather, and the heavy stillness of decades undisturbed. His beam swept across the tableau. An office, meticulously preserved, a tomb of forgotten time. A military surplus metal desk, thick with dust, dominated the center. Filing cabinets lined one wall, but it was the wall behind the desk that tightened Jake's throat. A mosaic of mining maps, sections bleeding crimson with red ink, dates meticulously penned. December 1950. "Jake, you okay down there?" Tommy's voice drifted from above, but Jake couldn't answer. His gaze had fallen upon the nameplate, barely visible beneath the dust. Robert Sterling, Chief Engineer. A tremor ran through him. His grandfather, Carl Mitchell, had died in the Brackenridge Mine in December 1950. Jake's hands trembled as he opened the first desk drawer, then the second, both empty. The third was locked. He grabbed the pry bar, the shriek of metal echoing like a gunshot in the confined space. Inside, a heavy metal lockbox yielded with a soft click. The contents initially made no sense. Several round metal canisters, like film reels, yet heavier. Beneath them lay a brittle, folded paper. Jake unfolded it carefully. A shift log, December 14th, 1950. Night shift. 31 names. Third name down. Carl Mitchell. Foreman. His grandfather. A familiar ache tightened his chest. A ghost of the man he'd never known. But this was different. This was hidden, deliberately so. Why would the chief engineer secrete away a routine shift log in a clandestine office? "Jake, we need to get down here now." Tommy's urgency spurred him. Tommy descended, followed by their supervisor, Bill Hudgkins, who took one look at the scene and pulled out his cell phone. "We need to stop work. This could be historical." But Jake wasn't listening. He'd found more papers beneath the metal canisters. Receipts, delivery orders, all dated December 15th to 16th, 1950. The day after the mine collapse that supposedly claimed his grandfather. 47 tons of industrial-grade concrete, rush delivery. His stomach plummeted. "Why concrete?" he murmured, the words hollow. "The mine collapsed. You don't pour concrete on a collapse." Bill, meanwhile, had turned his flashlight to the maps. "Jake, you need to see this." The Brackenridge Mine layout was rendered in intricate detail, tunnels spreading like veins beneath the town. But two versions were layered upon each other, the official layout in stark black ink and another, sinister rendition in red. Additional tunnels, twisting where they shouldn't, plunging beneath the Susquehanna River. "That's illegal," Bill whispered. "Mining under a river without federal permits," Jake finished, his voice cold. "That's a federal crime." He turned back to the desk, tearing through the remaining contents. More receipts, equipment rentals, and at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal, Robert Sterling's personal notes. Jake flicked to December 50, 1950. The handwriting was cramped, desperate. December 14th, 11:47 p.m. Water breach in Section 7. Men trapped but alive. Brackenridge ordering seal. This is murder. December 15th, 2 a.m. They're still transmitting. Can hear them on the emergency frequency. 31 voices. Brackenridge won't let rescue crews through. December 15th, 8 a.m. Concrete trucks arriving. God forgive us. Jake's hands shook so violently he almost dropped the journal. Tommy was reading over his shoulder, a guttural sound escaping him. Holy... they were alive! There was more, so much more, but Jake's eyes had snagged on a single line, searing itself into his mind. December 16th, 4 p.m. Carl Mitchell still organizing the men. His transmissions are clear. He knows we can hear him. He knows we're not coming. Jake set the journal down, his vision blurring. 31 men, including his grandfather, alive, trapped, calling for help while the company poured concrete to seal them in. "We need to call the police," Bill said, his voice strained. But Jake had found something else in the lockbox. A photograph. Black and white, creased but clear. the entrance to the Brackenridge Mine, not collapsed, not damaged, being filled with concrete while men in suits watched. The date stamp in the corner, December 15th, 1950, 9:47 a.m. 10 hours after the supposed cave-in, while 31 men were still alive underground. Jake lifted one of the metal canisters, heavier than expected. Fading letters printed on its side. Wire recording. Emergency mine frequency. December 14 to 17, 1950. His grandfather's voice. His last words. Calls for help deliberately ignored. "Don't touch anything else," Bill said, his voice distant. "This is a crime scene." A crime scene, 55 years old, yet undeniably evidence of murder. 31 counts of murder, buried beneath concrete and cash and decades of enforced silence. Jake stood in Robert Sterling's hidden office, surrounded by the ghosts of an unthinkable betrayal. His grandfather hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered, silenced by men who chose to bury him alive rather than face the truth of their illegal acts. The metal canisters pulsed with unspoken history, holding the voices of the dead, silenced for 55 years. But not anymore. "Call the police," Jake said, his voice steady now, a cold rage hardening in his chest, "and tell them to bring whoever handles cold cases, because 31 men were murdered in 1950, and I've got the proof right here." He picked up the photograph again, his gaze fixed on the men in suits, watching the concrete pour. William Brackenridge, the mine owner, would be among them, checking his pocket watch as 31 souls screamed for help just hundreds of feet below. Jake wondered if they heard the desperate hammering from underground, the frantic pounding of men realizing their fate. Or perhaps they were too deep. Perhaps all Brackenridge heard was the rumble of concrete trucks and the clink of coffee cups as a mass grave was poured. The rage in Jake was no longer hot, but crystallized into something colder, harder. These recordings would shatter everything. The town's history, the families bought with silence, the Brackenridge dynasty that still controlled half the county. 55 years of lies were about to end. 3 days later, Jake Mitchell sat in Vernon Holt's cluttered repair shop, watching the old man's hands tremble as he threaded the wire recording onto the playback machine. Days of police tape, evidence teams, and unanswerable questions had passed, but they had released copies of the recordings to him, confirming he was Carl Mitchell's grandson. "Haven't seen one of these in 30 years, Vern muttered, adjusting the playback head with jeweler-like precision. The shop hummed with the scent of solder and old electronics, shelves overflowing with radios and televisions from every decade since the 1940s. Wire recordings were already obsolete by 1950, but mines used them for their durability, their ability to withstand conditions that would destroy tape. Jake's father, Dennis, sat in the corner, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't wanted to come, muttering, "Nothing good will come of this." But he was here now, watching Vern with an intensity that suggested a battle against his own desire to flee. "Your dad know we're doing this?" Dennis asked Vern. "Dad. You are my dad," Jake corrected, confused. "I mean Bill Holt, Vern's father. Does he know?" Vern's hand stilled. "My father's been dead 12 years, but yeah, he would have wanted to know." He glanced at Dennis. His dad died down there too, Roy Henderson. The machine was ready. Vern had explained the wire's fragility, the need for slow, patient playback. Jake yearned to rip through it, to hear everything at once. But Vern set the speed low, gentle. "Here we go," Vern said, and hit play. Static, then crackling, then a voice, calm and professional, breaking through the ether. Emergency frequency check. This is Brackenridge Mine, Section 7, Foreman Carl Mitchell reporting. We have 31 men accounted for. Water breach in the main tunnel, but we've reached high ground. Requesting immediate assistance. Jake's throat seized. His grandfather's voice. Calm. Professional. Alive. Not panicked, not desperate, just doing his job. Making his report. Expecting rescue. Time is approximately midnight, December 14th. We're in the auxiliary chamber above Section 7. Air is good. We have water in lunch pails, approximately 2 gallons total. Battery power on the emergency transmitter is strong. Please confirm receipt of this transmission. Silence. Then Carl's voice again, still steady. Brackenridge Control, this is Mitchell in Section 7. 31 souls requesting assistance. We can hear water moving below us, but our position is secure. Please respond. Dennis made a low sound in his throat, his hands white-knuckled on his knees. Another voice, younger, frightened. Why aren't they answering, Carl? They're probably organizing the rescue. Save the battery, boys. 10 minutes every hour. That's all we broadcast. Vern fast-forwarded carefully. The wire hummed. He stopped at another marker. Hour 4. Carl's voice, now slightly less steady. This is Mitchell. Section 7. 31 men awaiting rescue. We can hear drilling. Repeat, we can hear drilling, but it sounds like it's moving away from us. Please confirm you have our position. We are in Section 7, auxiliary chamber above the water line. Jake heard it then, faint but definite, in the background. The sound of drilling. But Carl was right. Distant. Getting more distant. They're drilling the wrong way, Jake said. Vern nodded grimly. Keep listening. Hour 8. Mitchell, Section 7. The drilling has stopped. Please advise on rescue status. We've distributed the water. Eddie Coleman has a broken shoulder from the initial collapse, but he's stable. The men are in good spirits, but we need to know you're coming. Please, respond. Please. That last please, the first crack in Carl Mitchell's professional composure. Dennis stood up abruptly. I can't. Sit down, Jake said, surprised by the hardness in his own voice. You need to hear this. Hour 12. The recording continued. A different voice now, also professional, but with an undertone of worry. This is Roy Henderson, taking over transmission duties. Foreman Mitchell is conserving his strength. We can hear new equipment above us. Heavy machinery. Sounds like trucks. Multiple trucks. Please advise on rescue timeline. The men want to know if you've notified our families. Vern's face had gone pale. That was his father's voice. Roy Henderson, dead at 32, leaving behind a pregnant wife and 3 children. Hour 16, Roy continued. We're now hearing what sounds like concrete mixers. That can't be right. Please confirm the sounds we're hearing are rescue equipment. The men are getting concerned. Jake's stomach turned to ice. 16 hours after the collapse, and the concrete trucks were already there. Carl's voice returned, exhausted now. Hour 20. This is Mitchell. We need confirmation that you're attempting rescue. The water's rising slower than expected, but it is rising. We've moved to the highest point. I'm going to read the names of all men present for the record. He began reading. 31 names. Each said clearly, carefully. Jake heard his grandfather give weight to every single name, ensuring they would be remembered. Roy Henderson, Dale Watson, Jimmy Sullivan, Frank Morrison, Eddie Coleman, Tom Garrett. On and on. all present, all alive, waiting for rescue. Static. Then, barely audible, someone in the background. "They're not coming, are they?" "They're coming," Carl said, but not into the transmitter, to his men. "They have to be coming." Vern stopped the playback. His hands shook worse. "There's more. Hours and hours more. But I need to tell you something first." He looked at Dennis. "My mother, Roy's wife, she swore she heard his voice on the radio, December 15th, middle of the day. She had my father's emergency frequency radio in the kitchen, always did when he was on shift. She said she heard him calling." Dennis's face was gray. "My mother said the same thing. Said she heard Carl on the radio, calling for help. The company told her it was impossible, that grief was making her imagine things. They were transmitting on the emergency frequency," Jake said slowly. "Any radio tuned to that frequency would pick it up." "Unless someone was jamming it," Vern said. He pulled out a box of papers. "I've been researching since you called. December 15th, 1950, the FCC received complaints about radio interference across northeastern Pennsylvania. Powerful jamming on the emergency mine frequency. The investigation was dropped after Brackenridge Mining made a donation to the FCC commissioner's re-election campaign." Jake wanted to punch something, to tear the whole shop apart. They jammed the signals. The families might have heard fragments, pieces that got through, but not enough. Not enough to prove their men were alive while the concrete was being poured. "Play more," he said. Hour 24. Carl's voice now. "We know you can hear us. The drilling earlier, it was in Section 3. We're in Section 7. You're going the wrong way. Please, Section 7. Write it down. Tell the rescue crews. Section 7. A different voice, angry. "They know where we are. They have to know. Why are they—" "Stay calm." Carl, firm despite exhaustion. "Panic is the enemy. We stay calm. We stay alive." Hour 30. Roy Henderson again. "The concrete sound is getting louder. We don't understand what's happening up there. If you're sealing secondary tunnels to prevent further flooding, please be advised we are above the waterline. Repeat, we are above the waterline. We have time. You have time to reach us." Then, terrible in its clarity, a younger voice. "Oh God, they're sealing us in. They're sealing the mine." "That's not possible." Carl, sharp. "The company wouldn't—" "Then what's the concrete for, Carl? What's the concrete for?" Vern stopped the playback. The shop was silent, except for the hum of old electronics. "There's 17 more hours," Vern said quietly. 17 more hours of them slowly realizing what was happening, organizing the remaining water, sharing the last of their carbide for light. Carl keeps them together, keeps broadcasting even after they all know. Dennis was crying silently, tears running down weathered cheeks. Jake stood, pacing, hands clenched. "We need to get these to the police, to the FBI, to someone." "There's more you need to hear first," Vern said. He forwarded to near the end. Hour 45. Carl's voice, barely a whisper now, but still clear. "If someone finds these recordings, know that we didn't die in the collapse. 31 men survived. We called for help for 2 days. They heard us. I know they heard us because we could hear them working above us, sealing us in. William Brackenridge, if you're listening to this, you murdered us. You murdered 31 men to hide your illegal mining operation. Our blood is on your hands." A pause, then stronger. "To our families, we love you. We talked about you constantly. Every memory, every story. You kept us human down here in the dark. We're scratching our names into the walls so you'll know we didn't just disappear. We existed. We fought. We tried. Tell our children we were brave. Tell them we—" The recording cut to static. "Battery died," Vern said, unnecessarily. The shop was tomb silent. Dennis stood abruptly and walked out, the bell above the door chiming, incongruously cheerful. Jake started to follow, but Vern caught his arm. "There's something else. My father, before he died, he told me something. Said there was a man who came to the house in 1951, late at night, gave my mother an envelope full of cash and said it was from concerned citizens who wanted to help. But the man said if she ever talked about hearing Roy's voice on the radio, the money would stop and other things might happen. Threats."
My mother took the money. 5 kids to feed, no husband. She took it and never spoke about the radio transmissions again, except to my father years later. And he told me. Vern looked at the wire recorder. They all knew, Jake. The whole town knew something was wrong, but Brackenridge money kept everyone quiet. Jake picked up the container with the remaining wire spools. Not anymore. These recordings are going public tonight. Brackenridge's grandson is a state senator now. They still own half the county. I don't care if they own the whole state. 31 men called for help while they were being buried alive. Everyone's going to hear their voices. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Make copies first. Multiple copies. Hide them in different places. Vern nodded. What are you going to do? Jake thought of his grandfather's voice. Calm and professional, even while being murdered, keeping his men together, maintaining dignity in the face of unthinkable betrayal. I'm going to finish what he started. I'm going to make sure everyone knows their names.
The wire recordings spread through Hazelton like wildfire. Jake had uploaded them to the internet at 3 a.m., and by noon, Carl Mitchell's calm voice, counting off 31 living men, was playing on every news station in Pennsylvania. But Jake wasn't watching the news. He was back in Vern's shop, listening to hour after hour of recordings they hadn't played yet. Hour 18. Roy Henderson's voice crackled through the old speaker. The men want their families to know specifics. I'm going to let them talk. A younger voice, perhaps 20. Ma, it's Tommy. Tommy Garrett. I'm okay. We're all okay. Tell Susan I love her. Tell her we were going to have that June wedding after all. When I get out, I mean, when they get us out. Another voice, older, gruff. This is Frank Morrison. Helen, I left the mortgage payment in the coffee tin above the stove. Don't let them tell you I'm dead, Helen. We're not dead. We're right here. Jake's throat burned. These weren't last messages. These were men who still believed rescue was coming. The bell above the shop door chimed. Jake looked up, expecting another reporter. Instead, an elderly woman stood there, backbone straight despite her walker, eyes sharp as broken glass. "You're the Mitchell boy," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Grace Sterling, Robert Sterling's daughter." She moved into the shop with surprising speed. "I've been waiting 55 years for someone to find those recordings." Vern stood, offered his chair. She waved him off. "I was 23 in 1950, she said. Home from college for Christmas break. December 15th. My father came home at dawn. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Went straight to his study and locked the door. I heard him crying. My father never cried, not even when Mother died. She pulled an envelope from her purse, hands liver-spotted, but steady. He left me these, said if anyone ever asked about the mine, to give them these. No one ever asked, until now. Jake opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy but clear. The first showed the mine's command center, a room full of radio equipment, maps on the walls, men in suits clustered around a table. One man was circled in red ink, William Brackenridge. The second photo was worse. It showed Brackenridge holding a radio microphone, and in the background, clearly visible, a sign that read, "Emergency frequency, receiving transmission." They were listening. They had proof the men were alive, and they were listening. "There's more on the recordings," Vern said quietly. He'd been working while Jake and Grace talked, cataloging each hour. Hour 22. You need to hear this. Carl Mitchell's voice, tired, but still strong. "Mr. Brackenridge, I know you're listening. We can hear your response team directly above us. They're less than 40 feet away. We've been tapping on the pipes. The sound is carrying. Your engineers know exactly where we are. Please, William, I've worked for you for 15 years. These men have families. It's 3 days before Christmas. Please." Silence. Then, barely audible, someone crying in the background. "That's Eddie Coleman," another voice said. "His wife just had a baby, 2 weeks old." Grace Sterling's face was stone. "My father tried to override Brackenridge's orders, tried to redirect the rescue teams. Brackenridge had him removed from the command center, threatened to have him arrested for interfering with emergency operations." Hour 28. Vern continued the playback. Roy Henderson. "Now we figured it out. The illegal mining under the river. That's what this is about, isn't it? You hit water where you weren't supposed to be digging, and now you're covering it up. But we won't tell anyone. The men have agreed. We'll say it was an accident, a natural pocket of water. We'll sign whatever you want. Just get us out. Please, God, just get us out." Jake slammed his fist on the workbench. Tools jumped and scattered. "They offered to lie for him," he said. "They offered to cover up his crime, and he still—" "Hour 32, Vern said, forwarding the wire. "This is when it changes." Carl Mitchell again, but different now. Harder. "Since you're listening but not responding, I'm going to make a record for whoever finds this. We are in Section 7, Auxiliary Chamber. Coordinates on the mine map are L7, approximately 200 feet below surface. The water breach occurred at approximately 11:35 p.m. when Brackenridge Mining was illegally extracting coal from beneath the Susquehanna River. Federal maps will show this area as off-limits. Compare them to Brackenridge's extraction records. The evidence will be clear." A pause. "The following men are still alive as of—" a rustling sound. 8 a.m., December 16th, 1950. He began reading names again, but this time after each name he added something personal. "Roy Henderson has 3 kids and 1 on the way. Coaches Little League at St. Mary's. Dale Watson, wife Margaret, teaches school. Just bought the house on Elm Street. Jimmy Sullivan, mother is sick with cancer. He's her only support. Frank Morrison has twin daughters, age 7. They're in the Christmas pageant tomorrow night." On and on. 31 names, 31 lives. Not just miners. Fathers, sons, husbands, brothers. Real people being murdered in real time. While their killer listened. "My father kept a journal," Grace said suddenly. "I brought that too." She pulled out a leather book. December 16th, 1950. Jake read aloud. Brackenridge brought in federal inspectors at noon, after the concrete had set, showed them the collapsed entrance. They never asked to check the emergency frequency. They never asked why we used 47 tons of concrete on a simple collapse. The Mitchell boy is still transmitting. His voice is getting weaker, but he's still trying. God help me, I can't stand it. Hour 36. Vern said. A new voice on the recording. Weak, desperate. This is Dale Watson. Carl's resting, saving strength. We've decided to take turns. Keep the record going. The water's at knee level now. We've moved everything to the highest point. Some of the men are praying. Some are writing letters with pencil stubs on lunch bags. Jimmy Sullivan keeps saying his mother will think he abandoned her. She won't understand. Can someone tell her? Can someone tell her he didn't leave on purpose? Background voices murmuring. Then Dale again. We can hear the concrete setting. It makes a sound like bones settling. That's what we're hearing. The tomb being sealed. She threaded the wire with practiced ease. Static, long, empty static. Then, so faint it might have been imagination, tapping. Rhythmic, deliberate. SOS, Vern whispered. That's SOS. January 15th, 1951, Grace said, her voice a brittle whisper. A full month after the collapse, someone was still alive down there, tapping on the pipes. My father said the pattern continued for 6 hours, then stopped forever. Jake couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Someone had survived for a month in the dark, in the cold, in the tomb Brackenridge had forged. Who? He managed to ask. Grace shook her head. No way to know, but my father believed. He thought it might have been Carl, your grandfather. He was the strongest, my father said, the most determined. If anyone could have rationed the food, the water, the carbide, could have survived on pure will alone. Hour 40, Vern said suddenly, having brought the player outside. There's something you need to hear. Carl's voice, very weak now, but clear. If one of us survives longer than the others, he's to keep signaling as long as possible. We've agreed. Whoever lasts longest has to try to leave proof we didn't just give up. Frank Morrison knows Morse code. He's teaching it to the rest of us. Simple pattern, SOS. If you hear tapping after we stop talking, know that someone is still fighting, still trying. Don't give up on us. The recording continued, background voices teaching each other the pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Over and over, practicing for the unthinkable. Being alone in the dark after the others were gone. The families never knew about the January recording, Grace said, her gaze distant. My father couldn't bear to tell them, to let them know someone might have been alive that long. The guilt killed him. She continued, her voice heavy with the weight of decades. He wrote in his journal that he could have saved them all on December 15th if he just had the courage to shoot William Brackenridge and take over the rescue. She pulled out one more photograph. This was taken December 17th, 1950, at the sealed mine entrance. The photo showed a group of men in expensive suits, champagne glasses raised in a toast. William Brackenridge stood in the center, a broad, triumphant smile on his face. Behind them, fresh concrete gleamed wet in the flash. They're toasting, Jake said, his voice flat with disbelief. They just buried 31 men alive and they're toasting. The federal inspectors had just left, Grace explained, a bitter edge to her words. Brackenridge was celebrating. The illegal mining evidence was sealed away. The company was safe. Stock prices would remain stable. She pointed to a figure at the edge of the photo. That's my father, the only one not holding a glass. Jake stared at the photo, at Breckenridge's satisfied smile, at the champagne glasses catching the light, at the wet concrete that was still settling over 31 men who were, at that very moment, still breathing, still hoping, still tapping their names into the walls. "We're going to destroy them," Jake said quietly, his gaze burning with a cold fire. "Every last person in this photo who's still alive, every company that benefited, every official who looked the other way, they're all going to pay." Grace Sterling smiled for the first time, a terrible, satisfied expression. "My father would like that. He spent 2 years gathering evidence before the drinking got too bad. I have it all. Every document, every receipt, every name." "Hour 47, Vern said, his voice hushed. "The last transmission, Carl Mitchell's voice." Barely a whisper. "This is the final broadcast from Section 7. Our batteries are nearly dead. Most of the men are unconscious. We've carved our names into the walls as deep as we could. 31 names. Don't forget them. Don't let them disappear. We mattered. We lived. We were betrayed by men we trusted, but we didn't betray each other. Not once. We stayed together until the end. Tell our families we weren't afraid. Tell them we talked about them constantly. Tell them..." The recording ended. Somewhere in town, church bells were ringing. It was Sunday. 55 years after 31 men realized they weren't being rescued, their voices were finally being heard. But Jake couldn't shake the sound of that tapping. January 15th, 1951. Someone, maybe his grandfather, alone in the absolute darkness, still fighting, still signaling, still believing someone might care enough to listen. 30 days of darkness before the tapping stopped. "We need to open that mine," Jake said, his voice raw. "We need to get them out." "It's been 55 years, Vern said gently. "I don't care. They scratched their names in the walls. They're still down there waiting. We're going to bring them home." Grace Sterling touched his arm. "I know who can help. Some of the rescue crew from 1950 are still alive. They were ordered to stop digging. They've been waiting 55 years to finish the job." Grace Sterling's living room looked like a war room. Every surface was covered with documents, photographs, maps. She'd been preparing for this day for 55 years, and it showed. Jake stood at the dining table, staring down at 2 maps of the Brackenridge Mine. One, official, stamped by the Federal Mining Commission. The other, hand-drawn in his grandfather's careful script. The differences were staggering. The official map shows the mine stopping here. Grace traced a finger along a thick black line. 300 yards from the river. Safe, legal. But look at your grandfather's map. Carl Mitchell had drawn the real tunnels in pencil, annotated with dates and distances. The mine went another half-mile directly under the Susquehanna River. "They were stealing coal," Dennis said, his voice hard with anger. He'd been silent since arriving at Grace's house, but now his fury broke through. Coal that belonged to the federal government, coal they had no right to touch. "Worth approximately $12 million in 1950, Grace added. She pulled out a ledger, Brackenridge Mining Company, embossed on the cover. "My father calculated it. $12 million of stolen coal extracted over 3 years, all of it off the books." Vern was examining another document, a water table survey from 1949. Jesus Christ, they knew! Look at this. Extreme danger of water breach if mining continues eastward. Signed by Robert Sterling, Chief Engineer. My father begged them to stop, Grace said, her voice laced with pain. But Brackenridge had debts. The company was bleeding money from a failed operation in Kentucky. The illegal coal was keeping them afloat. Jake found another map. This one showed the rescue operation, or what was supposed to be the rescue operation. Red arrows indicated where teams were sent. All of them in the wrong direction. They had them dig here, he pointed to Section 3, and here, Section 5, but the men were in Section 7. They knew exactly where they were, and they sent rescue teams everywhere else. It's worse than that, Grace said. She pulled out a receipt. Look at the timestamp. It was a delivery order for industrial concrete, 47 tons, time-stamped 11:15 p.m., December 14th, 1950. Jake's stomach dropped. That's 30 minutes before the breach. They ordered the concrete before the accident even happened. Not an accident, Dennis said quietly, his face grim. They knew the breach was coming. They felt it building, and instead of evacuating, they prepared to cover it up. Grace nodded. My father's journal from that day. Brackenridge ordered concrete standing by. Says it's for routine maintenance, but he's had us monitoring the river wall all week. He knows what's coming. Jake picked up a photograph from December 14th, taken at 3 p.m. during shift change. 31 men heading into the mine for the night shift. His grandfather in front, hard hat tilted back, laughing at something someone had said. 7 hours later, William Brackenridge would be ordering their tomb sealed. "I've found something else," Vern said. He'd been going through a box of radio equipment Grace had provided. "These are transcripts. Someone was writing down everything the men transmitted." The pages were typewritten, neat and horrible. 12:47 a.m. Mitchell reports all men accounted for, requests immediate assistance. 1:15 a.m. Mitchell reports hearing drilling in Section 3, corrects rescue team direction to Section 7. 2:30 a.m. Henderson states men can hear concrete mixers, and written in pen beside this entry in different handwriting, "Continue with seal, WB." William Brackenridge's initials. He was reading their words as they begged for help, Jake said, his voice tight with fury, and initialing orders to keep sealing them in. Grace pulled out another document, the payoff records. Every family received $10,000, 5 times the standard death benefit. But look at the stipulation. Jake read the legal text. Recipients acknowledge complete satisfaction with settlement and agree to make no public statements regarding the circumstances of the accident in perpetuity. Buying silence, Dennis said. My mother never told me about any payment because she never got it. Grace showed them another list. 3 families refused to sign the silence agreement: Mitchell, Henderson, and Morrison. They got nothing. The company blacklisted them. Your grandmother, Jake, she had to leave town to find work. Took your father to Pittsburgh. That's why I barely knew about Grandpa, Jake said. Mom didn't know the full story. Dad never talked about it. The families that took the money couldn't talk about it, Vern said, and the ones who didn't were driven out of town.
Grace stood, walked to a locked cabinet. There's one more thing. The thing my father died trying to forget. She pulled out a reel-to-reel tape, different from the wire recordings. 1951, Brackenridge's private office. My father planted a recording device during a meeting. She had an old player set up. The tape crackled to life. The Mitchell woman came again. A secretary's voice. Christ's sake, Brackenridge's voice, irritated. Give her another 1,000. Tell her it's charity from concerned citizens. She says she doesn't want money. She wants to know where exactly her husband died. She wants to visit the spot. Tell her the entire mine is unstable. Too dangerous. Tell her anything. Just get rid of her. A door closing. Then Brackenridge's voice again, talking to someone else. The families are breaking. Most of them took the money. The holdouts will cave eventually. What if someone talks? Another man's voice. What if they heard the transmissions?
Who'd believe them? Grieving widows claiming they heard dead men on the radio? The FCC says it was interference from a ham radio operator in Scranton. That's the official story. But Sterling's a drunk now. Crawled into a bottle after Christmas and hasn't come out. No one will listen to him either. The federal inspector wants to check the site again, show him the same sealed entrance. The concrete's aged enough now. Looks like it's been there for years. A pause. Then Brackenridge again, colder. Those men were dead the moment they saw where we were mining. Even if we'd pulled them out, they'd have talked. Federal investigation would have destroyed us. 31 men versus the livelihoods of 3,000 who depend on this company. I made the only choice I could. You think they're dead by now? A long silence. What does it matter? They're 300 feet underground behind 50 feet of concrete. They might as well be on the moon. The tape ended. Grace turned it off with shaking hands. He justified it, Jake said, his voice hollow. He turned it into some kind of noble sacrifice. There's more, Grace said. She pulled out engineering diagrams. These are the structural plans for the seal. Look at this. The diagram showed the mine entrance, but also something else. Ventilation shafts, 3 of them. They sealed the main entrance, but these vents were capped but not filled, Grace finished. My father noted it. Small airflow would have continued for days, maybe weeks. That's how someone survived until January. That's how they were able to tap on the pipes for so long. Jake traced the ventilation shafts on the map. 3 narrow channels that could have been rescue routes. Instead, they were simply capped with steel plates, leaving the men below to suffocate slowly as the oxygen ran out. Hour 39 of the recordings, Vern said suddenly. He'd been listening while they talked. Listen to this. Roy Henderson's voice, weak but clear. We found the ventilation shaft in the southeast corner. The air is still flowing, just barely. If you could drop a rope, the shaft is only 18 inches wide, but Jimmy Sullivan is small enough he could fit. Please, if anyone is listening, check the ventilation shafts. Southeast corner of Section 7, we're directly below. They'd known. The trapped men had found a possible escape route and radioed its exact location, and Brackenridge had capped it instead. My father tried, Grace said, pulling out one more document. January 2nd, 1951, he filed an injunction to reopen the mine for additional rescue attempts. A judge blocked it. The judge's campaign had received $20,000 from Brackenridge 2 months earlier. Jake picked up the photo of Brackenridge, toasting with champagne at the sealed mine, studied each face. Are any of these men still alive?
Grace smiled grimly. 3. Howard Brackenridge, William's son, who's now 81 and still CEO of Brackenridge Industries. Thomas Garrett, no relation to Tom, who died in the mine. He was the federal inspector who signed off on the false report. He's 93, in a nursing home in Harrisburg. And James Wickham, the company lawyer who drew up the silence agreements, 91, retired in Florida. They're about to have their retirement interrupted, Jake said. Dennis stood, walked to the window. Outside, news vans were gathering.
Someone had leaked that Grace Sterling had evidence. "It won't bring them back," he said quietly. "No," Jake agreed. "But they've been waiting 55 years for justice, for someone to prove they weren't just casualties of a mining accident. They were murdered, and their murderers got rich off their deaths."
Grace pulled out one final item, a brass plaque tarnished with age. It read, "In memory of the 31 brave men lost in the Brackenridge Mine disaster, December 14th, 1950. They gave their lives to the profession they loved." "This is on the monument in Town Square," she said. "Brackenridge commissioned it himself. Had the nerve to speak at the dedication. Called them heroes who died doing what they loved." She dropped the plaque on the table with a clang. "They didn't give their lives. Their lives were stolen, and they didn't die doing what they loved. They died begging for help that was deliberately withheld. It's time the real monument was built, one that tells the truth." Jake looked at all the evidence spread across the table. Maps, recordings, receipts, photographs. 55 years of secrets finally exposed. But something was still missing. "We need to get into that mine," he said. "We need to find them, the physical evidence, their bodies, the scratched names, everything. Without that, Brackenridge's lawyers will call all of this circumstantial." "The mine's on private property now," Grace said. "Brackenridge Industries still owns it." "Then we go anyway," Jake said. "Tonight, while the news has everyone distracted." "That's trespassing," Vern pointed out. "Criminal trespassing." Jake picked up the photo of his grandfather laughing as he headed into his last shift. Carl Mitchell, who'd spent 47 hours trying to save his men, who might have survived alone in the dark for 30 days, tapping SOS that no one would answer. "Then I'll trespass. They've been waiting 55 years. They're not waiting another night." Dennis turned from the window. "You're not going alone, Dad. He was my father. I never knew him because of what they did. I'm going." Vern stood. "My father's down there too. Count me in." Grace Sterling smiled. "My father always kept mining equipment in the garage. Industrial cutting tools that can handle concrete. He knew someday someone would need them. I think he'd be proud to know it's today." Jake looked at the map one more time. Section 7. Auxiliary chamber. 200 feet below surface. 31 men who'd carved their names into the walls, determined not to disappear. "We're coming, Grandpa," he said quietly. 55 years late, but we're finally coming." The wire recordings played in the darkness of Vern's van as they drove toward the abandoned mine. Jake had insisted on listening to all of it, every hour, every voice, every moment of his grandfather's final 2 days. They needed to understand what happened in those 47 hours, to know what they were looking for. Hour 25. Carl Mitchell's voice filled the van. Weaker now, but still organizing, still leading. "We've divided the remaining water. Each man gets 2 ounces every 3 hours. The carbide is almost gone. We'll be in darkness soon. I've asked everyone to share one memory of sunlight, something to hold on to when the black comes." A younger voice, trembling. "I remember fishing with my dad at Hawk Creek. The sun was so bright on the water it hurt to look at." Another. "My daughter's hair in summer goes golden like wheat." Jake's throat closed as 31 men shared their sunlight memories, voices overlapping, creating a chorus of life in what was becoming a tomb. Hour 29. Roy Henderson. "Now the water's at waist level. We've moved to the highest shelf. Had to leave some things behind, but we saved the lunch pails. Don't know why. Seems important to keep them." Dennis gripped the door handle hard enough to make it creak. "Pull over, Dad, pull over." Vern stopped the van. Dennis stumbled out, dropped to his knees in the grass, and vomited. Jake went after him, put a hand on his father's shoulder. "We don't have to do this tonight," Jake said. Dennis wiped his mouth, stood slowly. "Yes, we do. I'm 58 years old, Jake. I've spent my whole life wondering what his voice sounded like. Now I know. He sounded capable, strong, even at the end." He looked at his son. "We're not stopping." They got back in the van. Grace had been silent, clutching a canvas bag of her father's tools. Now she spoke. "Play hour 35. Everyone needs to hear this part."
Carl Mitchell's voice again. Different now. Formal. "This is Foreman Carl Mitchell, making an official report for whoever recovers this recording. At approximately 0800 hours, December 16, 1950, we observed concrete dust filtering through cracks in the chamber ceiling. This confirms the main entrance is being permanently sealed. We are being deliberately entombed. I want the record to be clear. We did not die in an accident. We are being murdered." A pause. "Then, the following men are witnesses to this crime." He read all 31 names again, but this time each man responded. "Roy Henderson, I'm here, I'm alive, this is murder. Dale Watson, still breathing, this is murder. Jimmy Sullivan, age 19, they're killing us, this is murder." On and on, 31 voices, each declaring their murder while it was happening. Vern pulled into an overgrown access road. Ahead, barely visible in the moonlight, the sealed entrance to the Brackenridge Mine rose like a concrete tombstone. Yellow warning signs covered it. Danger, unstable mine, no trespassing. Hour 38. The recording continued as they unloaded equipment. "This is Frank Morrison. Carl's resting, saving air. We've been tapping on the pipes in Morse code like he taught us. SOS, over and over. Maybe the sound will carry somewhere the radio won't reach. Maybe someone will hear the sound of tapping in the background. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short."
Grace pulled out her father's old surveying equipment. "The ventilation shafts should be..." She checked a compass, pointed northeast. "About 40 yards that way." They fought through decades of overgrowth. Jake carried the industrial concrete saw, its weight making his shoulders burn. The first ventilation shaft was exactly where Grace said it would be. A steel plate, bolted into concrete, rusted but solid. Hour 41. Eddie Coleman's voice. Young, terrified. "The carbide's gone. We're in the dark now. Complete dark. You can't imagine. It's not like closing your eyes. It's like your eyes stop existing. Some of the men are seeing things, lights that aren't there. Their minds making up for what's missing." Jake started the concrete saw. The sound was deafening, but he didn't care about stealth anymore. Let Brackenridge Industries call the police. Let them try to explain why they were stopping a rescue 55 years overdue. Hour 43. Carl again, barely a whisper. "We've made a decision. Our bodies might not be recovered for years, decades maybe. So we're leaving proof. Each man is carving his name into the wall with whatever we have left. Belt buckles, pocket knives, fingernails if necessary. Deep as we can. So you'll know we were here. We existed. We fought." The concrete around the ventilation shaft cracked, split, fell away in chunks. The steel plate came loose and Jake pulled it aside. A rush of stale air came up, so foul he staggered back. "That's not just stale air," Vern said. "That's death," Grace finished. 55 years of it. They lowered a work light on a rope. The shaft went down 20 feet before opening into a larger space. Jake could see reflections of water at the bottom. "The chamber flooded eventually," Dennis said. "Groundwater seepage over the decades." Hour 45. Multiple voices now. Some praying, some singing hymns,
some just talking to keep the dark at bay. Then Carl's voice cutting through. If someone's listening to this because they found our bodies, know this. We could have lied, could have agreed to cover up Brackenridge's illegal mining to save ourselves. We refused. Not from nobility. We just couldn't let them get away with it. Couldn't let our deaths fund their crimes. So if you were listening to this, finish what we started. Expose them. Every last one of them. Jake rigged a harness and a rope. I'm going down. Like hell, Dennis said. I'm his son. I'm going. I'm younger, Dad, and I know what we're looking for. Before anyone could stop him, Jake swung into the shaft. The walls were slick with moisture and mineral deposits. 20 feet down, he emerged into a larger space. His headlamp swept across horror. The auxiliary chamber was smaller than he'd imagined, maybe 30 feet across. The water was knee-deep, black, stagnant. But above the waterline, covering every inch of wall he could see, were names scratched deep into the rock, overlapping, desperate. Carl Mitchell, husband to Rose, father to Dennis. Roy Henderson, tell my children I was brave. Dale Watson, Margaret, I love you. Jimmy Sullivan, mother, I'm sorry. Over and over, 31 names with messages. Some had scratched more than once, the letters getting shakier, more desperate as time passed. Hour 46. Carl's voice from above, from the recorder. Vern was still playing. The water's rising faster. Some of the men have stopped responding. We're running out of time. I want to say... His voice broke. The first time in 46 hours. Rose, if you hear this, I love you. Dennis, my son, grow up strong, grow up kind. Don't let what happened here make you hard. And someone, anyone, remember us. Remember we didn't give up. Remember we... Static. The batteries had died. Jake's light found something else. In the corner, arranged in a perfect circle just above the waterline, were the lunch pails. 31 of them placed with care, like an offering, like a final act of dignity in chaos. He waded over, his legs numb from the cold water. The first pail had a name scratched on it. T. Garrett. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper that had somehow survived, was a note. The pencil was faint but readable. Marcy, use the insurance money to get out of town. Don't let them buy your silence. Love, Tom. Every pail had a note. 31 final messages, protected in waxed paper, waiting 55 years to be found. Jake's light swept the chamber again and found them, the bodies, or what remained. They were against the far wall, above the eventual flood line, not scattered in panic, but arranged, sitting against the wall in a line, shoulder to shoulder. They'd faced the end together, deliberately, with dignity. One body was separate from the others, positioned near the ventilation shaft, smaller than the rest. Jimmy Sullivan, Jake whispered. He'd been trying to climb out, 19 years old, small enough to fit. He tried to reach the shaft that was being capped above him. His light caught something else. On the wall, separate from the names, carved larger and deeper than anything else, was a message. William Brackenridge knew we were alive. William Brackenridge murdered us. December 14th to 17th, 1950. 31 men. This was not an accident. Below it, in different handwriting, scratched with something sharp and deliberate. C. Mitchell, foreman. I stayed conscious longest. I heard you sealing us in. I heard you celebrating. God sees what you did.
The chill of December 20th, 1950 permeated the air. A cold that seeped not just into bones, but into the very soul of the mine. 6 days. Carl Mitchell had endured for 6 agonizing days, entombed in perpetual night, surrounded by the silent company of the dead, yet still his fingers, raw and desperate, etched the truth into unforgiving stone. Jake's hands trembled, each click of his camera a testament to the horror unfolding. The names, the desperate messages, the fallen bodies, the discarded lunch pails, and finally the damning accusation. This was it, the evidence that would shatter Brackenridge Industries, rewrite the fabricated narratives of history, and at long last deliver the justice so long denied. "Jake, hour 47!" Vern's voice, strained and urgent, echoed from above. "There's a 47th hour. We missed it before. It's not Carl. I think it's Brackenridge." Jake scrambled upward, his lungs burning with each ragged breath of stale, polluted air. Vern stood over a newly discovered wire spool, its label distinct, chillingly different. He pressed play. A voice, cold and dispassionate, filled the suffocating silence. William Brackenridge.
December 17th, 1950, 2 a.m. For company records, sealed separately. The words hung heavy, a death knell. The situation in Section 7 has been contained. Federal inspectors have accepted the cave-in explanation. Families are being approached with settlements. The concrete will hold indefinitely. The illegal extraction zone is now permanently inaccessible. Company assets are protected. A brief pause. They stopped transmitting 3 hours ago. It's finished. Another longer pause. Robert Sterling suggests we attempt recovery in a few years when attention has died down. I've overruled him. The bodies stay where they are. The evidence stays buried. This recording will be sealed in the company vault as insurance against future liability. The official story stands. 31 men died instantly in a cave-in. Heroes of American industry. The recording clicked off, leaving an oppressive void. Jake stood, coated in the grime of his grandfather's tomb, clutching the chilling testament to premeditated mass murder. "We've got them," he whispered, his voice raw with a mixture of grief and triumph. "We've got everything."
Grace Sterling wept silently, while Dennis, his face a mask of stone, stared fixedly at the black maw of the mine entrance. Vern, already a blur of motion, was on his phone, relaying the explosive truth to news stations. "There's one more thing," Jake said, his voice softer now. He pulled out a lunch pail he'd retrieved. Carl Mitchell's. Inside, alongside the faded note to Rose and Dennis, lay another piece of paper, newer, its edges crisp. It must have been scrawled days nader, in the lonely, encroaching darkness. The words, barely legible, were a desperate plea. "If my grandson finds this, I dreamed of you. In the dark, I dreamed I had a grandson. Strong, determined, the kind of man who wouldn't let injustice stand. I'm probably delirious, but if you're real, if you're reading this, you are my light in this darkness. You are my proof that something good came from my life. Find us. Free us. Tell the truth. Grandpa Carl, December 19th, 1950. Still fighting." Jake clutched the note to his chest, the dam finally breaking. Sobs racked his body. Dennis embraced his son,
2 generations united in a shared grief for a man they had never known, a man who had thought of them in his final desperate hours, refusing to surrender, even when surrender would have been a mercy. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder. Police, perhaps the FBI. It didn't matter. They held the evidence. They held the truth. 31 men were finally about to come home. Before dawn, the FBI swarmed the headquarters of Brackenridge Industries. Jake watched from across the street as agents carried out box after box of documents, their evidence tape gleaming in the nascent morning sun. Yet a gnawing dissatisfaction lingered. The wire recordings had mentioned a command center, the place where Brackenridge had coldly monitored the dying men. It had to still exist. "Found it," Vern announced, approaching with a folder of brittle, archived newspapers. "December 15th, 1950, the Hazelton Gazette. Rescue operations coordinated from Brackenridge Executive Mine Office. Address, 1247 Mountain Road." "That's the old administrative building near Shaft 2, Dennis mused. "It's been condemned for decades. Roof partially collapsed in the 80s. "Perfect place to hide evidence," Jake declared. Just then, Grace Sterling's Cadillac pulled up. Since their monumental discovery 3 nights prior, she had been a tireless advocate, working alongside federal prosecutors. Fatigue etched lines around her eyes, but her resolve was unwavering. "They arrested Howard Brackenridge this morning, but his lawyers are already fighting the charges, claiming the evidence is too old. Chain of custody issues. We need more." "Then let's go get it," Jake said, his jaw set. The drive to the dilapidated administrative building took them through the forgotten remnants of Hazelton's mining district. Empty company houses stood like silent sentinels, their windows dark, their porches sagging. This entire section of town had died with the mine. The building at 1247 Mountain Road was a 2-story brick skeleton, its windows boarded over, "Condemned" signs plastered defiantly across its entrance. But Jake's keen eyes immediately spotted fresh tire tracks in the overgrown parking lot. "Someone's been here recently," he noted, a ripple of unease passing through the group. They slipped inside through a side door, long since pried open and abandoned. The interior was a labyrinth of empty offices, fallen ceiling tiles, and scattered dust-shrouded furniture. Jake, however, was hunting for something specific, a room filled with radio equipment, maps plastered on the walls. They found it in the suffocating darkness of the basement. The door was locked, but the wood had long since succumbed to rot. Dennis, with a single powerful kick, sent it splintering inward. Inside, frozen in time like a macabre museum exhibit, was the command center. Radio equipment dominated one wall. 1950s-era transmitters and receivers, a chaotic array of dials and switches. Maps of the mine covered every surface, marked with red X's indicating where rescue teams had supposedly been sent, all in the wrong, feudal locations. But it was the corkboard that truly chilled Jake to the bone. Pinned to it were photographs. Not just any photographs, but the company ID photos of the 31 miners. Each one bore a stark red line slashed through it, a time scrawled beneath. "Time of death," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. They had marked when each man's voice fell silent. Carl Mitchell's photo bore the latest time, December 17th, 3:47 a.m. Final transmission. Jake began to photograph everything, his camera a silent witness to the chilling tableau. Then he spotted it, a metal filing cabinet in the corner, locked but not impenetrable. The pry bar made quick work of it. Inside lay a treasure trove of transcripts, not just of the miners' desperate transmissions, but of the cold clinical discussions among the response team.
Someone had meticulously documented every word spoken in this room during those harrowing 47 hours. Jake began to read aloud, his voice trembling with contained fury. December 14th, 11:58 p.m. Brackenridge. How many heard the transmission? Sterling. Just us. The emergency frequency is closed circuit. Brackenridge. Keep it that way. Start the concrete delivery. Sterling. Sir, they're alive. All of them. Brackenridge. They're dead men walking. They've seen the illegal shafts. Unknown voice. We could get them out and pay them. Brackenridge. You think 31 miners will keep quiet about federal crimes? Use your head. Dennis seized another transcript, his hands shaking violently. December 15th, 4 a.m. Radio operator. Mitchell's asking for his wife. Wants to talk to her. Brackenridge. Absolutely not. Radio operator. Sir, just to say goodbye. Brackenridge. No contact. Any transmission from us could be traced later. Let them talk to the walls. They heard everything, Vern said, scanning another page, his voice thick with disgust. Every plea, every prayer, every message to their families. And they sat here discussing it like a business problem.
Grace, meanwhile, had unearthed something else, a leather journal, secreted behind the filing cabinet. She opened it carefully, a look of profound sorrow on her face. "It's my father's," she said softly. "His real journal, not the one he kept at home." She began to read. December 15th, 10 a.m. I've become complicit in mass murder. The men below are organizing their own funeral, scratching their names into walls while we pump concrete into their tomb. Brackenridge sits here eating sandwiches, checking his watch like he's waiting for a train. I've recorded everything on wire spools, hidden copies. If I die, someone needs to know what happened in this room. Jake found a box labeled Evidence, Destroy After Settlement. Inside were more photographs, staged images of rescue teams drilling in all the wrong directions, clearly for the cameras. Brackenridge shaking hands with federal inspectors in front of the sealed mine. But one photo was different. It depicted the command center during the crisis, men in suits clustered around the radio equipment, and in the faint reflection of a window, barely visible, the photographer himself. "Robert Sterling," Grace breathed, her voice filled with a mixture of pain and revelation. "My father took this. He documented their crime while participating in it." "There's more equipment," Dennis called out from a nearby closet. He emerged with a dusty box containing more wire recording spools. These are labeled differently, outgoing transmissions. Vern's eyes widened. They did respond. They recorded their own responses. They didn't have playback equipment here, but Jake carefully packed the spools. Then another discovery, a map with a route marked in pencil. It led from the mine to a location labeled Secondary Containment. "What's secondary containment?" Jake asked, his mind racing. Grace studied the map, her brow furrowed. That's Riverside Cemetery. That's where they built the memorial." "The memorial is built over something," Dennis said slowly, the realization dawning on him. What did they bury under it? Leaving the chilling command center behind, they drove to Riverside Cemetery. The Brackenridge Mining Memorial stood on a hill overlooking the town, a stark, black granite monument listing the names of the 31 dead men. Fresh flowers, offerings from the recent news coverage, lay at its base. "It was built in summer 1951, Grace explained. Brackenridge paid for everything, insisted on the location, the specific spot." Jake walked around the monument. Its foundation was far larger than necessary for a simple memorial. Concrete poured deep. "We need ground-penetrating radar," he declared.
Something's under here. Or, Vern interjected, pointing to a small maintenance shed, we could check the cemetery records. The shed was locked, but they were long past caring about trespassing. Inside, filing cabinets held burial records stretching back a century. Vern quickly located 1951. Here, he announced, his voice hushed. Special interment, July 1951. Sealed concrete vault, 8 feet by 8 feet by 6 feet deep. Contents, mining equipment and personal effects from Brackenridge disaster. Sealed by order of William Brackenridge. Personal effects, Jake repeated, a grim understanding dawning. They buried evidence. His phone rang. It was the FBI agent assigned to the case. Mr. Mitchell, we need you to come to the federal building. Howard Brackenridge's lawyer is claiming the wire recordings are fabricated. We need you to... I'll do you one better, Jake interrupted, his voice firm. Bring an excavation team to Riverside Cemetery. We're standing on top of more evidence.
3 hours later, the cemetery resembled an archaeological dig. The FBI had cordoned off the area, and workers carefully removed the memorial, piece by painstaking piece. When they finally reached the concrete vault beneath, Jake could see it had been sealed with unusual care. Multiple layers, reinforced steel, built to last forever. It took industrial equipment to break through. When the vault finally yielded its secrets, the FBI agents stepped back, allowing Jake and the families to enter first. Inside were 31 mining helmets, each tagged with a name. 31 broken watches, all stopped between 11:47 p.m. December 14th and 3:47 a.m. December 17th. And 31 small boxes, each containing personal effects that should have been returned to families. Wedding rings, pocket watches, photographs the men had carried. But there was more. A metal strongbox, sealed separately. Inside, William Brackenridge had left his ultimate insurance policy. Detailed documentation of the entire cover-up. Receipts, signed orders, even photographs of the men's bodies taken through the ventilation shafts before they were sealed. He'd kept proof of his own crime as protection against his co-conspirators. The FBI agent whistled low. This is a signed confession. He documented everything.
Jake picked up his grandfather's helmet. Tucked inside the leather band was a small, faded photo. Rose Mitchell holding baby Dennis. Dated 1949. Carl had carried his family with him into the dark. There's one more spool, the agent said, lifting a wire recording from the bottom of the strongbox. It's labeled Final Statement WB, January 1951. They played it right there in the cemetery, the town lights twinkling below them. William Brackenridge's voice, older, tired, filled the night. This recording is my insurance. If anyone attempts to expose the events of December 1950, remember that I have documented every official who took bribes, every inspector who falsified reports, every town leader who accepted our money. The list includes 2 senators, a federal judge, and the governor's chief of staff. If I go down, northeastern Pennsylvania goes with me. A pause. The 31 men in that mine were heroes, I suppose. They chose truth over life. Admirable, if pointless. But I had 3,000 employees depending on Brackenridge Industries. I chose the many over the few. History will judge me, but history is written by the survivors, and I survived. Another longer pause. Sterling's boy keeps saying he can still hear tapping from the mine. Morse code SOS. I've had the ventilation shafts filled with additional concrete. If someone is still alive down there, well, They won't be for long. This is my final word on the matter. The mine stays sealed, the truth stays buried, the company survives. The recording clicked off. He knew, Dennis said, his voice cracking, the horror of the realization etched on his face. He knew someone might still be alive, and he sealed the vents anyway. January 15th, Jake said quietly, a new chilling truth clicking into place. Grace's father heard the tapping on January 15th. Brackenridge had the vents filled on January 10th. The tapping Robert Sterling heard, it was through solid concrete. Someone, maybe my grandfather, was still tapping SOS through solid concrete 5 days after the vents were sealed.
The FBI agent was already on his phone, calling prosecutors. We have enough to charge Howard Brackenridge with conspiracy to commit murder, even if he was only 26 when it happened. He inherited this evidence. He knew. He kept it hidden. But Jake wasn't listening. He was looking at the recovered evidence, the meticulously preserved proof of mass murder. William Brackenridge had saved it all, thinking it protected him. Instead, it would destroy everything he'd built. The sun began its slow descent over Hazelton, painting the old mining district in hues of gold and orange. Somewhere beneath their feet, 31 men still waited in their tomb. But their voices had finally been heard. Their truth was finally free. We need to have a proper funeral, Jake said, his gaze fixed on the fading light. Once they're brought up, all 31 buried properly, with their real stories told. Grace Sterling nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. My father would want to be there. His ashes, I mean. He never forgave himself for his role. Maybe this will let him rest. As they left the cemetery, Jake noticed a small crowd gathering at the fence, families of the dead miners, some he recognized from old photographs. They stood in silent vigil, watching, waiting. 55 years of questions were finally being answered. But one question remained. When they opened Section 7, what else would they find? What other messages had the dying men left in those final desperate days? Tomorrow, the real excavation would begin. Tomorrow, 31 men would finally come home. The mine entrance loomed in the pre-dawn darkness, the concrete seal, an unyielding monument to indifference, still intact despite 55 years of weathering. Jake, Dennis, Vern, and Grace arrived at 2 a.m., armed with industrial cutting equipment from Grace's father's extensive collection. No permits, no permission, just raw, unshakable determination. "This is illegal," Vern muttered again, though he was already unloading the concrete saw. "They've been illegal for 55 years, Jake retorted, his voice steely as he powered up the saw. "We're just balancing the scales." The concrete was far tougher than anticipated. Industrial grade, poured thick, built to withstand the ravages of time and truth. It took 3 agonizing hours of deafening cutting to breach it, the scream of the saw splitting the silent night. Jake half expected the police at any moment, but none came. Perhaps Grace had made some discreet calls. Perhaps, just perhaps, God was finally paying attention. When the hole was wide enough, Jake rigged a harness and rope. The shaft plunged into absolute blackness. "I'm going down," he announced, his voice echoing eerily. "Jake, my grandfather, my risk." He descended through the jagged concrete opening, his headlamp slicing through darkness that had remained undisturbed for 55 years. 20 feet, 30 feet. Then his boots splashed into water. The auxiliary chamber was smaller than he'd imagined. Knee-deep water, black and still, reflected his light like polished obsidian. But then his beam caught something that stole his breath. The walls. Every inch above the waterline was covered in scratched names, deep gouges in the stone, overlapping, desperate. Carl Mitchell, husband to Rose, father to Dennis. Roy Henderson, tell my children I was brave. Jimmy Sullivan, mother, I'm sorry. 31 names with messages carved by fingernails, belt buckles, anything they could find. His light swept left and found them. The bodies were against the far wall, above what must have been the eventual flood line. Not scattered in panic, but arranged with a chilling dignity, sitting in a line, shoulder to shoulder, facing the entrance they had known would be sealed, waiting with silent resolve for a rescue that never came.
One body sat apart from the others, near the center. Even after 55 years, Jake recognized the position, the foreman's helmet still resting on the skull. Carl Mitchell. He had positioned himself in front of his men, facing the sealed entrance as if standing eternal guard. In the corner, arranged in a perfect poignant circle just above the waterline, were the lunch pails, all 31 of them placed with meticulous care. Jake waded over, his legs numb from the icy water. The first pail he opened bore a name scratched onto its surface, T. Garrett. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper that had somehow miraculously survived, was a note. Marcy, don't let them buy your silence. Tom. Every pail held a note. 31 final messages, protected and waiting. But it was Carl Mitchell's pail that made Jake's hands tremble uncontrollably. Along with the original note to Rose and Dennis, there was another, newer piece of paper, written later, when Carl must have been utterly alone. If my grandson finds this, I dreamed of you. In the dark, I dreamed I had a grandson. Strong, determined. You are my light in this darkness. Find us, free us. Tell the truth. Grandpa Carl. December 19th, 1950. Still fighting. Jake photographed everything. The bodies, the carved names, the lunch pails, the messages. Evidence that would finally destroy Brackenridge Industries. Then his light caught the largest carving, separate from the names. A declaration etched in furious desperation. William Brackenridge knew we were alive. William Brackenridge murdered us 31 men. This was not an accident. Below it, in different, more frantic scratches. C. Mitchell, I stayed conscious longest. I heard you sealing us in. God sees what you did. December 20th, 1950. 6 days. Carl had survived 6 days. Near another body, smaller, younger, was more scratching. J. Sullivan, January 10th, 1951. Still here, still tapping. Mom, I'm sorry. The 19-year-old had lived almost a month in absolute darkness with 30 corpses, still tapping an SOS that no one would ever hear. Jake? Dennis's voice echoed from above, urgent, strained. Police are coming.
Jake grabbed Carl's lunch pail and scrambled upward, propelled by a fierce, righteous anger. As sirens wailed closer, he looked back at the gaping hole they'd cut. 31 men were visible now. Found, witnessed. Let them arrest us, Jake said, clutching his grandfather's final desperate note. We got what we came for. Proof they didn't just die. They were murdered while begging for help. And we can finally bring them home. Police cars pulled up, lights flashing, painting the night in stark primary colors. But Jake noticed the FBI was with them. Someone, somewhere, had made the right calls. The real excavation would begin at dawn. 55 years late, but the rescue had finally come. The excavation of Section 7 took 3 grueling weeks. Jake stood at the edge of the open mine shaft, watching as the first body bag was slowly, reverently raised to the surface. The FBI had initially wanted to manage everything, but the families had fought, fiercely and successfully, for the right to be present, to witness, to finally receive their dead after 55 years of agonizing limbo. The 31 bodies had been found exactly as Jake had first seen them, arranged against the wall, shoulder to shoulder, with one exception. Jimmy Sullivan, the 19-year-old, had been found near the ventilation shaft, his fingernails torn away from clawing at the sealed steel plate above, a desperate, futile attempt at escape. But it was what they found with Carl Mitchell's body that changed everything. "Mr. Mitchell," the forensic technician called, his voice hushed. "You need to see this." Jake descended into the mine one last time. His grandfather's body was still where they'd found him, separate from the others, positioned near a wall covered with his final, defiant messages. In his lap, protected by his jacket, and wrapped in what looked like pages torn from a maintenance logbook, was a bundle of papers. The technician carefully lifted them, placing them into an evidence bag. He protected these deliberately, the technician explained, wrapped them in waterproof cloth from an equipment tarp, then kept them under his jacket. Whatever these are, he wanted them preserved. In the temporary forensics tent, they meticulously separated the pages. Jake, Dennis, and Grace watched with bated breath as the technician used special lights and preservation techniques to make the faded pencil visible. The first page was dated December 17th, 1950. 4 a.m. Just minutes after the batteries had died, after the last radio transmission. Carl Mitchell's handwriting, shaky but clear, filled the page. The radio is dead. The men are unconscious or sleeping. I remain awake. Someone must witness. Someone must record. I will write until I cannot. Roy Henderson died at 3:15 a.m. He was talking about his children, said their names over and over. I promised to remember them. Thomas, age 7. Margaret, age 5. Susan, age 3. Baby, unnamed. Due Christmas. Jake's throat burned as his grandfather documented each death, each man's final words, final thoughts. December 18th. Noon, I think. No way to tell time except by counting. Dale Watson died holding a photo of his wife. Kissed it before he went. Asked me to tell her he wasn't afraid. He was afraid. We all are. But the lie might comfort her. Frank Morrison went quietly, carved his daughter's initials into his palm with a nail. Said pain reminded him he was still alive, still their father. I am now alone with 27 dead men. The water has receded some. I've moved the bodies above the water line. They deserved dignity. Dennis covered his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Grace gripped Jake's arm,
hard enough to hurt. The next pages were different. Carl had started writing smaller, conserving paper. December 19th. Found Jimmy Sullivan's hidden stash of carbide. The boy was saving it, probably hoping to signal if rescue came. Used it to see while I arranged the men properly. They will not be found scattered like animals. They'll be found as they were. Brothers. I've been thinking about Dennis, my son. He'll grow up without me. Rose is strong. She'll remarry. I hope he's kind to my boy. I hope Dennis knows his father loved him. I hope he knows I thought of him every hour down here. The tapping continues. I've been doing it so long it's automatic now. SOS. 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 My knuckles are raw, but the pain keeps me focused. Someone might hear. Someone might come. Then, dated December 20th,
William Brackenridge, I know you'll read this someday. Your guilt will make you check. You'll want to know what we said about you in the dark. Here it is. We forgave you, not for your sake, for ours. Hate takes energy, and we needed our energy to survive. But forgiveness is not absolution. You are a murderer. You killed 31 men for money. God sees. History will see. Your children will see. To whoever finds this, we could have saved ourselves by agreeing to Brackenridge's crimes. We refused, not from nobility, but from knowing that more men would die in those illegal tunnels. Our silence would have killed others, so we chose to die speaking truth. The next section was different again. The handwriting was worse, wandering frantically across the page. December 21st. I think the dark is complete. The carbide is gone. I write by touch, hoping these words are legible. The human mind isn't meant for absolute darkness. I see things. Lights that aren't there. Faces of the dead. Rose sometimes standing in the corner, telling me to come home. I know she's not real, but I talk to her anyway. I've been thinking about legacy, what we leave behind. I'm leaving behind a son who will never know me. These words, the truth on these walls, is it enough? How do you compress a life into scratches on stone? Jake turned the page. The writing was larger now, desperate. December 22nd. Water rising again. Moved to highest point. Can barely feel my hands. Still tapping. Always tapping. Someone might hear. Someone might come. The dead men watch me. I arrange and rearrange them. They deserve dignity. We all deserve dignity. I dreamed I had a grandson. Strange dream for a dying man, but clear. A young man, strong, determined. He was reading these words. He was bringing us home. Probably delusion from lack of oxygen, but a comfort. If you're real, grandson, know that you were my light in this darkness. That was the passage Jake had found in the lunch pail, but there was more. December 23rd. 7 days. 7 days in the dark with the dead. I've carved everyone's names again. Deeper. The stone is hard, but I have nothing but time. Each name a life. Each life a story. The stone will remember, even if the world forgets. Can hear something. Drilling? No, different, softer. Concrete being poured. They're sealing the ventilation shafts. The last air will go soon, but I keep tapping. SOS, SOS. Someone might hear. The next page was barely legible, the writing wandering wildly.
December 24th, Christmas Eve. Rose will be at her mother's. She makes ham on Christmas Eve, turkey on Christmas. Dennis will get the rocking horse I built, hidden in McGraw's barn. Someone tell her the boy should have his gift. The dead men and I are having Christmas dinner. Imaginary feast. Morrison says the turkey's too dry. Henderson wants more gravy. We laugh. The dead men laugh with me in the dark. Is this madness? Does it matter? Still tapping. Knuckles bleeding, but still tapping. It's my heartbeat now. SOS. I exist. I exist. I exist. Then, the last entry. The writing's so faint, they needed special equipment to read it. December 25th, 1950. Christmas. Alone. Always alone. But also not alone. 30 brothers sleep around me. We came down together. We'll leave together someday. To Rose. I loved you from the moment I saw you at the church social. You wore a yellow dress. You laughed at my terrible jokes. Thank you for Dennis. Thank you for 7 years of morning coffee and evening conversations. Thank you for loving a simple miner. To Dennis, be good to your mother. Be kind. Be brave. Be better than the men who did this to us. I'm proud of you, son, for the man you'll become. To William Brackenridge, I forgive you, but forgiveness is not forgetting. These words are my witness against you. You thought you were buying 31 men. You were buying 31 ghosts. We will haunt your legacy forever. I stop writing now. Stop tapping. Stopping. The dark is complete, and I am. The sentence ended mid-word. A chilling silence left in its wake.
The forensics tent was a tomb of hushed reverence, broken only by Dennis's raw, broken sobs. Jake held the fragile pages, a sacred text, understanding the sheer monumental effort they represented. 11 days. Carl Mitchell had endured for 11 unimaginable days in absolute darkness, surrounded by the silent testament of death, yet he had continued to write, to witness, to tap out the very essence of his existence. "There's more," the technician whispered, her voice barely audible. She had been meticulously examining Carl's tattered clothing. From his breast pocket, she carefully extracted a small notebook, the kind miners carried for shift notes. Inside, every page was covered with the same words, inscribed over and over, sometimes neat, sometimes frantic, sometimes scrawled in the blackness. Dennis Mitchell, my son. Dennis Mitchell, my son. Dennis Mitchell, my son. Hundreds of times, a father clinging to his child's name like a lifeline in the suffocating dark. Dennis collapsed, Jake catching him, both men consumed by a shared, profound grief. Grace Sterling stood quietly, tears streaming down her face, a silent witness to their raw anguish. "We need to release this," Jake finally said, his voice hoarse. "All of it. Every single word. The world needs to know what kind of man Carl Mitchell was, what kind of men they all were." The FBI agent nodded, his own face etched with the weight of the moment. "Howard Brackenridge's lawyers won't be able to fight this. This is testimony from the grave. 31 men's dying testimony." But Jake's mind was elsewhere.
wrestling with a chilling realization. December 25th, 1950. His grandfather had died on Christmas Day, alone in the dark, his last thoughts of his family, his last act a defiant forgiveness, his final wish the preservation of dignity for his fallen brothers. "The tapping," Jake said suddenly, the words bursting forth. "Grace, your father heard tapping on January 15th. Grace's eyes widened, a dawning horror in their depths. "But that's 3 weeks after—" "Someone else survived," Jake finished, the implication stark. "After my grandfather died, someone else kept tapping." They returned to the forensic evidence, their movements urgent. On the wall near Jimmy Sullivan's body, scratched faintly into the unforgiving stone, J. Sullivan, January 10th, 1951. Still here, still tapping. Mom, I'm sorry.
The 19-year-old had survived for almost a month in absolute darkness, surrounded by the dead, still tapping an SOS on pipes that would never bring rescue. "Jesus Christ," the FBI agent whispered, the full, sickening horror of it settling over them all. It wasn't just the immediate murder of 31 men, but the slow, agonizing death that unfolded over weeks. The last survivor, barely more than a boy, tapping out his existence into unhearing stone, 300 feet below a world that had already forgotten him. "We need to identify all the remains," Jake commanded, his voice firm, resolute. "Every man needs to go home to his family. They need to be buried properly, with their names, their stories, their truth." As they prepared to leave, Jake looked back at the evidence bag containing his grandfather's final testament. 11 days of documenting death, maintaining dignity, insisting on truth. Carl Mitchell hadn't merely died in that mine. He had become something more profound, a witness, a chronicler, a fierce guardian of the dead. And now, 55 years later, his eloquent testimony would finally bring down an empire built on murder. That afternoon, they found the rocking horse in McGraw's barn, covered in a thick layer of dust, but otherwise intact. Dennis ran his hands over the smooth, worn wood, feeling the ghost of his grandfather's careful sanding. "He thought of this," Dennis murmured, tears blurring his vision. "Dying in the dark, and he thought to tell someone about my Christmas gift." That was who Carl Mitchell was. That was who all of them were. Men who faced death thinking of others, who maintained their humanity in an inhumane situation, who chose truth over survival. 31 heroes, finally coming home. The courthouse in Harrisburg was packed beyond capacity, a suffocating press of humanity. Jake sat in the front row, flanked by Dennis and the other grieving families of the 31 miners. Across the aisle, Howard Brackenridge sat rigid, a brittle shell, his legal team forming an impenetrable wall around him. At 81, he was a chilling echo of his father. The same cold eyes, the same cruel, unyielding mouth. 2 months had passed since they'd reopened Section 7. 2 months of exhumations, painstaking identifications, and meticulous evidence processing. But today was different. Today, the wire recordings would be played in open court. The prosecutor rose, his voice cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, the state will now present audio evidence recorded between December 14th and December 17th, 1950. The courtroom fell into an expectant, heavy silence as Carl Mitchell's voice, raspy but clear, filled the air. "Emergency frequency check. This is Brackenridge Mine, Section 7. Foreman Carl Mitchell reporting. We have 31 men accounted for. Water breach in the main tunnel, but we've reached high ground. requesting immediate assistance. Howard Brackenridge's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He had heard these recordings before, but hearing them in open court, with the families present, with the media recording every word, was an entirely different torment. The prosecutor allowed the tape to play, hour by hour, the hopeful pleas slowly giving way to confusion, confusion to dawning fear, and fear to a terrible, undeniable understanding.
Hour 20. Carl's exhausted voice. We need confirmation that you're attempting rescue. The water's rising slower than expected, but it is rising. We've moved to the highest point. I'm going to read the names of all men present for the record. As Carl's voice slowly, deliberately read the 31 names, family members in the gallery began to weep openly. Some had never heard their father's name spoken aloud by someone who had known them in those final, terrible moments. Then came the worst part. Hour 36. Dale Watson's voice, weak but chillingly clear. We can hear the concrete setting. It makes a sound like bones settling. That's what we're hearing. The tomb being sealed. Howard Brackenridge's lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection! These recordings haven't been authenticated. They've been authenticated by 3 separate forensic audio experts, the judge stated, his voice cold and unwavering. Overruled. Continue. The prosecutor changed recordings. This next audio was recorded in the Brackenridge Command Center during the same time period. William Brackenridge's voice, devoid of empathy, filled the courtroom. They are dead men walking. They've seen the illegal shafts. Use your head. 31 miners won't keep quiet about federal crimes. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Howard Brackenridge flinched. Then came the January recording. William Brackenridge again, his voice chillingly detached. Sterling's boy keeps saying he can still hear tapping from the mine. Series code SOS. I've had the ventilation shafts filled with additional concrete. If someone is still alive down there, well, they won't be for long. Monster! Someone screamed from the gallery. The judge banged his gavel, but without much conviction. The prosecutor approached Howard Brackenridge. Mr. Brackenridge, you inherited control of Brackenridge Industries in 1975, correct? Yes. And you also inherited your father's private papers, some of them including the evidence we found in the memorial vault, the evidence your father buried. Howard's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. I never opened that vault. But you knew it existed. My father mentioned it, said it contained historical documents. The prosecutor pulled out a document. This is a memo from you to your head of security, dated 1987. You ordered increased surveillance on the old mine site because, and I quote, the situation from 1950 requires continued containment. What situation were you referring to, Mr. Brackenridge? Howard was sweating now, beads of moisture glistening on his forehead. There were safety concerns. Safety concerns that required you to pay off 3 different urban exploration groups who got too close to finding the command center. Jake watched Howard crumble. The man had spent 30 years protecting his father's monstrous secret, and now it was meticulously, relentlessly destroying him. Your Honor, the prosecutor announced, I'd like to call Vernon Holt to testify about the radio signals his mother heard.
Vern took the stand, his testimony devastating in its simplicity. His mother had heard his father's voice on the radio, calling for help. She'd been dismissed as hysterical. She had died, believing she'd imagined it. She didn't imagine it, Vern said, looking directly at Howard Brackenridge, his voice trembling with years of suppressed rage and sorrow. My father was calling for help. and your father made sure no one could answer. One by one, family members testified. Stories of mothers who never recovered, of children who grew up in grinding poverty because their fathers' deaths were deemed accidents without full compensation, of families destroyed by silence agreements they couldn't afford not to sign. Then Jake took the stand. "Tell us about finding your grandfather's final notes," the prosecutor prompted gently. Jake described Carl Mitchell's 11-day survival, his painstaking documentation of each man's death, his unwavering maintenance of dignity in unimaginable circumstances. He read the Christmas Day entry aloud, his voice breaking as he recited, "Thank you for Dennis. Thank you for 7 years of morning coffee and evening conversations." The defense might argue, the prosecutor stated, that William Brackenridge made a business decision, that he chose to save his company. How do you respond to that? Jake looked directly at Howard Brackenridge, his gaze unwavering. "My father and his men offered to lie. They offered to cover up the illegal mining to save themselves. Your father refused. He didn't kill them to protect the company. He killed them because it was easier than saving them."
The prosecutor played one more recording. It was new, found just days ago in Brackenridge Industries' own archives. William Brackenridge speaking to his board of directors in January 1951. "The situation has been resolved. The federal investigation is closed. The families have been managed. In 10 years, no one will remember their names. In 20 years, it will be like they never existed." "But we exist," Jake said, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom from the witness stand. "The sons and daughters and grandchildren of the men you murdered. We exist and we remember, and we're here to collect what you owe." The judge called a recess. In the hallway, Jake was swarmed by reporters, but he pushed through them to where Grace Sterling stood, clutching a small urn. "My father's ashes," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm going to scatter them at the memorial service tomorrow. He can finally rest with the men he couldn't save." The memorial service was planned for the following day. All 31 miners would be buried properly with full honors, their real story finally told. The governor would speak. The president had sent condolences. The mining union was creating a permanent memorial. But first, there was more testimony. After the recess, an unexpected witness was called. Thomas Garrett, 93 years old, the federal inspector who had signed off on the false report. He was wheeled in, an oxygen tank his constant companion, but his voice was surprisingly clear. "I took a bribe," he said simply. $20,000 to say I'd inspected the mine and found it naturally collapsed. I never went down, never looked, just signed what Brackenridge told me to sign." "Why are you testifying now?" the prosecutor asked. "Because I'm dying," Garrett said, his gaze distant. "Lung cancer. Weeks left, maybe days. And I hear them." "Hear who?" "The 31 men. Every night for 55 years I hear them calling for help, hear them saying their names. I need them to know. I need their families to know. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." He broke down completely, the oxygen mask muffling his wrenching sobs. Even Howard Brackenridge looked away, unable to meet the old man's tormented gaze. The prosecutor stood for his closing arguments. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about the murder of 31 men, though that alone would be enough. This is about a system of power that decided working men's lives were worth less than rich men's profits. It's about a cover-up that involved judges, inspectors, officials, an entire structure built to ensure that some lives matter and some don't." He played Carl Mitchell's voice one more time.
Someone must witness. Someone must record. Carl Mitchell witnessed. He recorded. And now, 55 years later, we must act. Howard Brackenridge didn't pull the trigger, but he inherited blood money and spent 30 years ensuring the truth stayed buried. That makes him an accessory, after the fact, to 31 murders. The defense's closing was weak, a desperate plea focusing on statutes of limitations and the impossibility of prosecuting crimes from 1950. But everyone in the courtroom knew it was over. The evidence was too overwhelming, the public outrage too intense. As they waited for the verdict, Jake stood outside the courthouse with the families. Vern was there, and Dennis, and dozens of children and grandchildren of the murdered miners. "Whatever happens in there," Jake said, looking at the expectant faces, "we did it. We brought them home. We told their truth." "It's not enough," someone murmured, a voice weary with years of unspoken pain. "Not for 55 years of lies." "No," Jake agreed, "but it's a start." His phone rang. It was the foreman of the jury. "We have a verdict." They filed back in. Howard Brackenridge stood as the verdict was read. "On 31 counts of accessory after the fact of murder, we find the defendant, Howard Brackenridge, guilty." The courtroom erupted. Families crying, embracing. 55 years of grief, finally acknowledged, finally validated. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. On the charge of evidence tampering, guilty. Howard Brackenridge collapsed into his chair, a defeated, broken man. At 81, he would die in prison. The Brackenridge Empire, built on the bones of 31 men, was finally, irrevocably, falling.
But Jake wasn't watching Howard. He was looking at a young woman in the back of the courtroom, diligently taking notes. She wore a press badge, but there was something familiar about her face. She approached him after. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice clear and earnest, "I'm Sarah Sullivan. My great-uncle was Jimmy Sullivan, the 19-year-old. Jake's throat tightened. Jimmy, who had survived almost a month, tapping until the very end. "I wanted to thank you," she continued, "for finding them, for making sure everyone knows he didn't abandon his mother. That was his biggest fear, that she'd think he just left." "He tried to climb out," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "The ventilation shaft. He was small enough to fit." "If they hadn't capped it," Sarah finished, her eyes burning with fierce conviction, "he would have saved them all. He would have gotten out and told everyone. That's why they had to seal it."
That night, Jake stood at the reopened mine entrance. Tomorrow, they would seal it again, but properly this time, with a glass wall so visitors could peer into the darkness where 31 men had spent their final days. But tonight, it was just him and the silent, echoing maw. He thought about Carl Mitchell, riding in absolute darkness, maintaining dignity while surrounded by death. About Jimmy Sullivan tapping SOS for weeks after everyone else was gone. About all of them choosing truth over life. "We did it, Grandpa," he whispered into the darkness, a quiet, profound triumph in his voice. 55 years late, but we did it. Everyone knows your names. Everyone knows what happened. You can rest now." The wind whistling through the mine shaft sounded almost like voices, like 31 men saying thank you, like Carl Mitchell finally putting down his pencil, finally stopping his endless tapping, finally able to rest. Tomorrow they would be buried as heroes. But tonight, in the darkness where they died, their truth was finally free.
The funeral stretched across the entire Hazelton cemetery. 31 coffins, draped in American flags, were arranged in the same solemn formation the men had died in, shoulder to shoulder, Carl Mitchell at the front, Jimmy Sullivan slightly apart. The president had sent representatives. The governor spoke. But it was Dennis Mitchell who delivered the words that truly mattered. "My father died on Christmas Day, 1950, he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. Alone in the dark, surrounded by his dead brothers, still writing love letters to my mother, still thinking about my Christmas present. I never knew him, but through his words, through his insistence on documenting truth, I know him now. We all do." Jake stood with the other pallbearers as they gently lowered Carl Mitchell into the hallowed ground. The headstone was new, black granite with gold letters. Carl Mitchell, 1915 to 1950. Foreman, father, truth-teller. Someone must witness. Someone must record. The other 30 headstones bore similar inscriptions, not just names and dates, but who they were. Roy Henderson, coached Little League. Frank Morrison, twin daughters' devoted father. Jimmy Sullivan, tapped SOS until the end. As the burial concluded, Howard Brackenridge was being led to federal prison. Brackenridge Industries had declared bankruptcy within hours of the verdict. The company built on murder was finally, utterly dead. But there was one more thing. Grace Sterling approached the microphone, a solemn grace about her. My father, Robert Sterling, was the chief engineer. He participated in this crime, though it destroyed him. His ashes will be scattered here, among the men he failed to save. But first, I want to read his final testament, written the day before he died. She unfolded a yellowed paper, her voice clear and strong.
I helped murder 31 men. I heard their voices and did nothing. I deserve no forgiveness. But if their families permit it, let my ashes mix with the soil above them. Let me spend eternity apologizing. Let me be remembered not as a good man, but as a warning that ordinary people can become monsters when they choose comfort over conscience. The families voted. Robert Sterling's ashes would be scattered. He would spend eternity among the men he had betrayed, neither truly forgiven nor entirely forgotten. As the crowd dispersed, Jake walked to the new memorial. Not the lies Brackenridge had built, but the truth. A black wall containing the complete text of Carl Mitchell's final notes, every word he'd written in the dark. Above it, in letters 3 feet tall, they died, speaking truth. The old mine entrance had been transformed. The glass wall they'd installed allowed visitors to peer into Section 7. The lunch pails were still there, arranged in their poignant circle. The names scratched into the stone were lit by soft, reverent lights. A plaque explained everything: the illegal mining, the cover-up, the 47 hours of desperate calls for help. School groups would come here, would learn that 31 men chose truth over life, that ordinary people could be heroes, that power without conscience was murder. Jake's phone rang. It was the FBI agent who had handled the case. "Thought you should know," she said. "We've opened 17 other cold cases related to mining deaths in the 1940s and 50s. Similar patterns. Your work here, it started something."
After she hung up, Jake stood looking at the mountains surrounding Hazelton. How many more Carl Mitchells were out there? How many more covered-up murders, bought silence, buried truths? We're not done. he said to Dennis, who had come to stand beside him. No, his father agreed, his voice firm. Carl wouldn't want us to be done. That night, in the Mitchell home, 3 generations gathered. Dennis had retrieved the rocking horse from McGrath's barn, meticulously restored it, and given it to his own grandson, Jake's nephew, named Carl. "Tell him the story when he's older," Dennis said, his hand resting on the boy's head. "Tell him about the man he's named for. Tell him that integrity matters more than survival, that truth matters more than comfort." Jake pulled out the lunch pail. They'd kept Carl Mitchell's with his final note still inside. It would go to a museum eventually, but for tonight it sat on their kitchen table. A stark reminder that even in absolute darkness, even facing certain death, a good man had thought of his family, documented truth, and insisted on dignity. The doorbell rang. Jake opened it to find an elderly woman with a walker. "I'm Helen Morrison," she said, her voice frail but clear. "Frank's widow. I wanted to thank you, and to give you this." She handed him a photograph. It was taken on December 13th, 1950, 1 day before the disaster. The entire night shift crew standing at the mine entrance, Carl Mitchell in the center, everyone smiling. "Frank took it," she said, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. "Brought it home to show me his friends. It's the last photo of them alive and free." Jake studied the faces. Young men, middle-aged men, one boy barely 19. They looked happy, normal, utterly unaware that in 24 hours they would begin dying by inches in the dark. "We'll make copies," Jake said gently. "Every family should have one." Helen Morrison smiled through her tears. "They saved others, you know. After the news broke, 3 other mining companies admitted to illegal operations and shut them down before anyone else got hurt. Your grandfather and the others, their deaths weren't meaningless." After she left, Jake stood on the porch, looking toward the mountains where the mine lay. Somewhere beneath tons of rock and concrete, Section 7 remained. A tomb, a testament, a truth that couldn't be buried. The wind carried a sound that might have been imagination. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. But also, we existed. We mattered. We were brave. 31 men who refused to disappear. And now, they never would.
Thanks for watching. We'll uncover the next mystery together in the next Vanished Story.
They never would.